Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The presentation you are about to watch is a leading edge presentation and how it relates to the masonry industry. This slideshow was created on April 16th. My name is Ken Hebert. I am the National Sales Manager and co-founder of Malta Dynamics. And if you're watching this and you have any questions, I always ask the audience to please save them till the end. But if you're driving around a couple of weeks from now and you think of some question, you can email me. My email's there at the bottom, kahebert@maltadynamics.com, and I encourage you to please reach out with any questions that you may have. So with that said, let's get started. So first, let me give our standard disclaimer. This presentation does not replace fall protection training approved by your safety director. As most of you know, your company calls the shots. It's the employer who ultimately is responsible for the safety of the workers. So that's who you need to be taking your direction from. Leading edge of confusion. That's what I like to call it, because the leading edge best practices out there and the advice ranges depending on who you're talking to. Sometimes you're dealing with manufacturer reps. Sometimes you're dealing with outside sales guys from manufacturers or distributors, and they might not always know the rules, right? And the standards and the testing protocols and the technical aspects of the equipment that you're using. So when in doubt, remember, always reach out to the manufacturer, and they should always provide you an explanation in writing. I can't think of one manufacturer that's not prepared to do that, including ourselves. So that's the expectation that you should have on the products that you're using. So what is a leading edge application? Here's an example. Let's start with non-leading edge applications. Now here's what we've got. We've got an anchor. If you look on the graphic to the left, the anchor doesn't have any edges underneath it, right? So if the person falls, and come over here and look at the graphic on the right, we see that the person is hanging directly underneath the anchor. And this cable that is colored orange did not, I repeat, did not come into contact with anything. And that is not a leading edge application. All right, so if the self-retracting lifeline is overhead and someone falls and the cable doesn't come into contact with an edge or a floor or anything, then you are not in a leading edge application. Now, here's a leading edge application. Same worker, stick figure worker, same anchor, but we see that he's going to fall. Let's move over here to the right. And when the worker falls, we see that the line is coming into contact with something. It's got a contact point. All right. If your SRL is at a lower level on the surface of the roof or below the D-ring, that is really a situation where you're going to almost always have the cable come into contact with an edge or a floor. And that is precisely what a leading edge situation is. Now, we have to talk about sawing action. The reason we want to talk about this is because there are situations whenever you have a swing fall, right? That's where the worker has moved away from underneath the anchor point and falls, and then you have that swing, and we can see this stick figure here is going back and forth. And that's illustrating, if you will, the swinging motion. Well, when you have a leading edge situation and that cable line is coming into contact and swinging, imagine that cable running across the edge of whatever it is. So that creates a sawing action, all right? And there's the weight of the worker putting additional forces into play, and during that swing fall process, you can literally saw that line off. That is why most companies do not allow any web retractables to be used in leading edge applications. Now let's talk for a second about what OSHA says. This is 1926.501. Each employee who is constructing a leading edge 6 feet or more above lower levels shall be protected from falling by guardrails, safety net systems, or personal fall arrest systems. Here's the exception. When the employer can demonstrate that it is infeasible or creates a greater hazard to use these systems, the employer shall develop and implement a fall protection plan which meets the requirements of paragraph K of 1926.502. So exceptions in feasibility. You'll hear that out on the job site from safety directors, superintendents, project managers, where they're saying, hey, there's nothing overhead for me to attach to, it's infeasible. And they start trying to figure out a way so that they don't have to use the fall arrest equipment. And I call that looking for loopholes. Now, when I was a little kid, this guy here, W.C. Fields, used to be on late night TV, right? I'm not that old. They were reruns, trust me. But anyway, there's a great story about W.C. Fields where his best friend comes to visit him on his deathbed, and W.C. Fields is reading the Bible. Now, anyone who knows who this guy is knows that he's a boozer, a rummy, if you will, and he was a devout atheist. So his buddy knows that he didn't believe in God, and he says, well, Bill, what are you reading the Bible for? I thought you were an atheist. And W.C. Fields says, I'm looking for loopholes. And that's why I put that in here. You don't want to be that safety director. You don't want to be the one looking for loopholes. It's no good. I try to paint the picture of there's a fork in the road, and if you go down the left path, you're looking for loopholes, right? You're trying to figure out ways that you don't have to use fall protection, ways that you don't have to think about safety. You don't want to be that guy. You want to be going down the right fork in the road, the one where you're always trying to keep your guys safe. You're not looking for a way out of the responsibility or accountability. You're looking for the solution. So don't be looking for loopholes, be looking for the solutions. So we go back to the exception. When the employer can demonstrate that it is infeasible or creates a greater hazard to use these systems, the employer shall develop and implement a fall protection plan which meets the requirements, right? So they're saying, OSHA's telling you, if it's infeasible, you still have to go create a plan. So there is no out. You will always, as we move through time, you will see infeasibility phased completely out of all the job sites over time, especially when you're dealing with a big GC, right? Or you're dealing with a company that's got strict means and methods and puts safety first and is trying to build a safety culture. And what you'll realize is that there are solutions out there. You might not know what they are, but they exist. You've got temporary systems, mobile follow rule. Here, I'll show you some. Here we go. Here are some from the list. Starting at the top left, you've got anchor options, right? We've got drop through anchors, concrete anchors, swivel anchors, cross arm straps. You've got confined spaced entry situations. If you're dealing with confined space or hard to get to areas below you in a drop down situation. You have our grabber, one of the X series products, mobile fall arrest. You can roll this in to any place, hoist that mast up, and have 3 to 5 people in fall arrest 35 feet above your head. Going back down from right to left on the bottom, you've got wall mounted systems, the door fixed, which is perfect for hoistways. If you're bringing rock board or sheetrock into a commercial project and you're flying it in or booming it up from the ground, this can put 2 people in tie off, and you just put it on the other side of one of the doors that you're dealing with. And of course, the last one is temporary horizontal lifeline systems. Those are just examples. So since we're talking about masonry, we have to mention overhand bricklaying and related work. Most of you are familiar with this. It really is what you do. Means the process of laying bricks and masonry units such that the surface of the wall to be jointed is on the opposite side of the wall from the mason, requiring the mason to lean over the wall to complete the work. In a situation with overhand bricklaying work, the anchor really needs to be overhead. And I know that many of you don't have that luxury, or it seems that you don't have that luxury, but you really need to be thinking, and I've got some solutions later on. But here are the questions that you have to ask. Is overhand bricklaying and related work a leading edge application? Yes, most of the time it is. The only time you can get out of leading edge is if you're putting the worker in restraint, or if you're making sure that that anchor is above their head. If you're exposed to a fall, you are in a leading edge application. If you're not exposed to a fall, you are in restraint. Remember restraint, it's one of the key solutions. So one of the things that we want to talk about in this presentation is, how do you know the self-retracting lifeline is designed for leading edge? And there's a few things that you can do. One, you look at your SRD or SRL, and you look at the label. If you look at the graphic there to the left, you'll see it's marked SRD-LE. If it doesn't have LE on it, it is not designed for leading edge. Some common myths is a shock pack. It used to be some manufacturers would put a shock pack on a retractable and claim it was for leading edge. That was a big selling point for years. Not the case. There's specific testing for leading edge retractables, and if you pass those tests, you put LE on the retractable. If it has edge in the brand name, another common myth. There are some companies out there that will put edge in the name of the product. That does not necessarily mean it's been tested for leading edge. And then the other thing I'll remind you of, if it says sharp leading edge, you need to know there are no standards for sharp leading edge testing as of yet. And SRD, if that's new to some of you, and I know it always is, that stands for self-retracting device, which is just another way of saying self-retracting lifeline. So before this presentation, think about what your definition of leading edge was. Do they define only the circumstances in which you might want to utilize a leading edge SRL? No, because other scenarios exist, and on a job site, situations change. Does a leading edge only exist during the work in progress? No, a leading edge exists anytime the cable can come in contact with an edge. Is a leading edge limited to a structure in the process of being built? We see this a lot in formwork that continually creates a new and unfinished and therefore potentially sharp edge. No, a leading edge exists anytime a cable can come in contact with an edge. Is the leading edge only the potential situations where a lifeline or a lanyard might impact a sharp, rough, or unprotected edge? No. Again, a leading edge exists anytime the cable can come in contact with an edge. You're going to hear that repeated over and over again. You look at the situation, the scenario, if that cable can come in contact, if you put weight on the bottom of it, if that worker falls, will that cable come into contact with something? If it can come into contact with something, it's leading edge. Finally, last question, I'll read it. Is there a difference between a leading edge and a sharp leading edge? No, only in the marketing world. OSHA and ANSI make no distinction between a leading edge and a sharp leading edge at this point. So is the leading edge self-retracting lifeline required only if the lifeline might contact structural steel? Why do I ask this question? You ask. Why does he ask this question? Because right now, structural steel is the only thing that's being tested, right? When you do the leading edge tests, they test on structural steel. But what about concrete, galvanized roof panels, tiled or slate roofs, shingled roofs, parapet, scaffolding, right? You can come into contact with those. They're not structural steel. So are those being tested on? That's a great question. Can any of these surfaces that I just mentioned be sharper than structural steel? Yes, they can. It depends on the scenario that you're dealing with, but we have found in our testing that concrete is the sharpest material over and over and over again. So you want to be cognizant of your situation. With no leading edge definitive answer from ANSI or OSHA, and this has been going on for a long time now, you are left to take direction from trainers and the manufacturers of the product. Malta Dynamics policy is this: anytime you have the potential for a lifeline to come into contact with an edge of any kind of material during a fall, it becomes a leading edge application. As a manufacturer, we're only required to test on structural steel. However, some manufacturers, including us, are testing our leading edge branded products on multiple surfaces. And again, I'll reiterate, our engineers are finding concrete is the most destructive. So, ways to avoid leading edge applications. Now, here we have a person in fall restraint. So I want you to look at this graphic on the left. So we have a guy, and we're going to say for argument's sake that he's 12 feet away from the wall here. So we put the anchor 12 feet away, and guess what? We put him in 11-foot retractable. So if the retractable is 11 feet and the edge is 12 feet away, guess what? That guy's in restraint. He's not in fall arrest. That's the best way to handle this scenario. Now we get into that overhand bricklaying. If your work is over here on the other side of the edge, you have to be very careful. But yes, you can still put people in restraint in that scenario. You just have to know where you're working. While it's important to decide which SRL to use on leading edge, it's also critical to look at the anchor that you're using. Is there an overhead structure to anchor to? That should always be the very first question. If so, use a cross-arm strap, a beam walker, or a slider, something to attach so that we get an overhead anchor. Are there columns behind you, right? Or above you in some cases, where you can put two cross-arm straps, right, and run a horizontal lifeline behind you, and you can put a guy in restraint. Although if you do that, you got to be very careful not to create trip hazards. You know, replace one hazard with another. Is the floor precast or poured in place? If that's the case, you have the opportunity to use drop through anchors or toggle anchors, which can be put overhead. So there's a good chance if you're preparing and you're doing your pour and you're working on a floor below, you could have anchor points throughout well, what is the roof? It's the floor above, but it's the roof for you. And that's a good method so that you've got anchor points overhead. So leading edge summary, we're wrapping it up here. Here are the points that I'd like you to remember, please. Avoid working so hard to avoid using fall protection. Don't be looking for loopholes. That's critical. Make sure you're going down that right fork in the road and not the left. It makes all the difference in the world. Remember that the Secretary of Labor in April 3rd of this year, they're hiring more inspectors, right? Remember that the demand of the general contractors is only going to intensify. And I know that they're not always great about giving you solutions. In fact, I've heard many GCs say, well, that's your problem, you need to figure it out. But there is always a solution. The point is the GCs are getting tighter and tougher to deal with when it comes to not having the right fall protection solutions on hand. Remember, always have a written fall protection plan. If you don't have one for the job site you're working on, go to maltadynamics.com. We have a template up for free. It's been used many times over the past few months. I highly recommend it. It's very simple and easy to use, and you can use it as a template and adapt from job site to job site. You must identify and have a solution for the hazards that you're working with, and if you're smart, you can make it cost effective. Using an overhead anchor is always the best practice, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I think a cross-arm strap is probably one of the best, most universal solutions, and that's a $25 anchor. It doesn't get any more cost effective than that. And remember to always share your best practices. Share them with your employees, share them with people at the ABC or AGC meetings. If you're part of a safety council, share those best practices every time you get a chance. You're making the world a safer place. And that's it. We try to keep these short. So I hope you enjoyed our leading edge presentation. And for Malta, on behalf of Malta Dynamics, this is Ken Hebert saying thank you for watching and be safe.